So thank you everyone for coming. We are going to be talking about claiming our roots and cultural appropriation in the culinary world. So first, I would like everyone just to give a quick introduction of themselves so everyone understands who they are and how it relates, and just 60 seconds if possible. And there will be 2 more chefs joining us, and when they come, I'll let them give a little intro as well.
Hello everyone. My name is Mohammed Diallo. I'm the co-founder and CEO of Ginjan Brothers, a company that develops and brings to market traditional African foods and beverages. We also operate a cafe called Ginjan Cafe right here on 125th Park Avenue. And the idea is to showcase African aesthetics, food, taste, and sound. We started this company in 2015 when we realized that after almost 20 years of living in the United States, in all of these amazing supermarkets that we go to and places, there's actually no representation of African food. Both it's 2 countries and nothing. So we decided to take on that challenge and be one of the people to make that change. And I must say I'm a little intimidated. I'm surrounded by a bunch of real chefs here. I make juice, so, but yeah.
Juice and great coffee as well.
Good evening, everybody. My name is Chef Airis Johnson. I'm a professional chef to the world. I work with kids, work in restaurants, consult, you name it, I do it as a chef. But my most important work is working with students and mentoring, because being a chef is like a young person's game, physically. And so, I'm trying to prepare the future for what's to come and to be better than I am. And I guess as it says on the advertisement, I'm also a child champion on Food Network, so if that matters to anyone, I've done that, and I'm happy to be here. Oh, also, I'm from New Orleans, Louisiana. I'm proud of that. So, thank you for having me.
Hello, I'm Daniel Lanzilotta. I've been a chef for well over 30 years. I'm a Bronx native, and I'm a resident artist of Haiti, of Leogan, and I'm also a Bronx resident artist. I've been cooking for many, many years. Right now I have a private chef service called Leap Foods. I do private dinner parties and events. And I've been a chef educator in a school up in Connecticut. I did that for 3 years, and that was sort of challenging. I'm also an advocate for oceans and ocean health. I collect ocean plastic debris, and I speak to the health of waterways and environments as an environmentalist. And my platform is to speak to the food chain and what's happening, and what's happening now with the so-called COVID-19 virus. That's just, I don't want to bring that up, but there's a chain of events that are happening in the environment that leads up to what's happening in the healthcare, in the virus and what's happening out there. So as an advocate, I'm there to speak to saving the oceans as a chef and the food chain.
Cool. I always feel weird speaking into these things. Do we need it, or can I speak?
By all means.
This is loud. Everyone can hear it good? All right, I'm James. I am not a chef. I am a restaurateur. I'm one of the partners to Fonda Boricua. It's one of the oldest restaurants in Spanish Harlem. Started out like half a little space, and then eventually expand to the entire floor. And then we had a place across the street. I helped Jorge, who is the chef, helped pick up the business again from when it was starting to tank and starting to fail to where it is today and where we're looking to expand. My main focus in La Fonda is just, paying more attention to the neighborhood, what's changing, how I can adapt with the change, because gentrification is real, and rather than push against it, I choose to work towards it and then find ways that the people in the community can also gain from it. There's Michelle, she's awesome. If you don't know her, get to know her. And that's pretty much it. I'm also a Bronx native, born and raised, and I live in the city, in front of Central Park, so it's fun. But yeah, our food is traditional Puerto Rican cuisine. Jorge has been on the Food Network a few times. Drove down with Bobby Flay for La Arroz con Pollo, which we haven't made in a while, but we beat him. So that's pretty much it right now.
Hey, what's up everybody? I'm J.J. Johnson, chef and founder of Fieldtrip, rice bowl shop between 115th and 116th in Lenox. right in front of the 2 and the 3 train. We've been open 9 months. My claim to fame is I opened up the original Cecil on 1/18th in St. Nicholas. I have cookbooks, I have a television show, I'm on BuzzFeed, but I'm a true grassroots person. I believe in communities regardless where my restaurant is or what I'm cooking. The goal is that restaurants stay open because you believe in the community you put your restaurant in, and not into all the hype that comes around it, because at the end of the day, the community is what's gonna keep you there for 10 to 20 to 50 years, regardless what community you're in.
All right, great. And then I'm RanDe Rogers. I own Sisters Cuisine, which has been on 124th between Park and Madison for 25 years now. I'm also a board member of Uptown Grand Central, which is a nonprofit that focuses on the culturally responsive and responsible development of the East 125th Street corridor. And I also want to thank Harlem Restaurant Week and the Caribbean Cultural Center for being our home for this event. It's a beautiful space, and I know it's also been our home for a lot of really great conversations. So let me kick this off, and I just want to ask if we really think that we've been socialized to have this type of critical discussion about our culture and its impact on cuisine. And feel free, everyone, to jump in. I want this, I'm not calling names or anything, but does anyone have thoughts on that? If we're even prepared and to have this conversation?
What do you mean by that?
So what I mean by that is sort of the nuances. It's a very nuanced conversation, and often it gets bogged down and sort of pigeonholed into one direction or the other in terms of cultural appropriation. And well, here, let me start somewhere else. Maybe that was a little bit too much too early. So, well, let me ask, what do we believe the difference is between soul food and Southern food? Anyone has? Okay, let's go. Here we go.
So, this is not to, I don't even think this will answer your question, soul food and Southern food. Like I said, I'm from New Orleans, Louisiana. And oftentimes, I live in Brooklyn, I've been living in New York for 20 years. And so, New Yorkers are people from the North, they like to associate everything below Delaware as the South, period. And so, if you're below Delaware, anything that you cook is soul food or Southern food. It's like all things run together. And New Orleans food, Cajun Creole cuisine, which I feel like we're a planet of our own. So I would say the difference is, I don't know. There isn't really a difference. I feel like soul food comes from the South.
I'll jump in here.
Started there.
So soul food, the terminology soul food was created during the Great Migration when black people were coming north. And the media was talking about black people's cooking and giving them something with soul food. That's what was written in the media. That when you were slinging pots and pans, the terminology used for black people cooking was the lick of this, the soul of that, those words that dictate towards people of color during that time and period, that was given to black people by white media, right? But in modern day, when Paula Deen was cooking Southern food or soul food, or the same thing that my grandmother from the South was cooking, would never be associated as soul food, as Southern food, because it was a white person cooking it. And it was considered the divide between a black kitchen and a white kitchen. That's really where the word soul food in the deep history of cooking started. And if you really look at who came to Harlem and who was a part of Harlem, it was the people from the South. It was the black people from the South. And soul food was then had a home, if it was Sylvia's, right? There was a place where you can now get this food that people were talking about. So it was a true divide. I don't think there's truly nothing different, but the media telling you what one thing is, what one person looks like, and what the other person looks like.
Right. Any other thoughts on that? Well, so then I want to sort of add this next layer onto it about that exact point, and sort of, if you take it back, a lot of the ingredients in traditional Southern and even some elements in soul food are of West African root, right? And so then when we talk about this question of cultural appropriation, where do you draw the line of ownership of a specific culture, right? So in many respects, what you're saying is that both Southern and soul food are all derivatives of African American slave culture. And then, so then there's a certain ownership to Black African Americans that you could say, this is derivative of our people's culture. But then you have this element of West Africans who arguably are where all the recipes originated itself, right? And so I'm trying to understand if the lines themselves are ones that are strictly racial or where we're drawing the line. Because like to your point, in many respects in that time, it was, is it a Black person cooking it in the South or is it a white person cooking in the South? If it's a Black person, then it's soul food. If it's a white person, then we're gonna call it Southern food, right? So at the same, and so I also want to take a step back from that and talk about a conversation that we've had previously last time about rice, right? And why it is that if we have a white person cooking the food, we're calling it soul food, and we might say that's cultural appropriation from a Black community. But jollof rice is agreed to be Senegalese. But you have people from both Nigeria and Ghana claiming it and saying, we've got the best. But it's never a question of, oh, you stole that from Senegal. It's just, it's sort of this, does anyone sort of getting what I'm saying?
Yeah. I'd like to say that I think when you say like cultural appropriation, like again, Cajun, Creole, New Orleans, we're a culture. So it doesn't matter if I'm cooking it, if Paul Prudhomme is cooking it, like we're from the same culture, Black or white. So when you say cultural, there's white people from the South too, born and raised.
Right.
And Southern cuisine is the food that their family has been eating forever, even though it like came from, slavery, and maybe the slaves were cooking the food for them, but it's still like their family history, their culture, their food culture. So when I think of appropriation, I think of someone that is not from the South at all and hasn't studied like Southern cuisine, like at length, maybe lived in a Southern state, worked in a Southern restaurant or something like that, or just was absorbed in the culture and then said, hey, I'm in New York, the South sells, I'm gonna open up a Southern restaurant. To me, that's appropriation. Whether you're white, Black, you could be Black and you're from Vermont and never even passed the state lines of Vermont, and you know nothing about Southern food, but you're like, hey, I'm gonna open up Mama's Kitchen.
Right.
To me, that's appropriation.
Okay.
Sure.
So then let me ask, when do people feel, well first, how does people's cuisine reflect their culture, if at all? And under what circumstances would they have a problem with someone from a different background cooking that food and providing that food to the public?
I'm gonna jump in.
Yeah.
One dish that I just recently learned is not made like it was brought to us by the Africans in Puerto Rico. So mofongo is actually an African dish. Did not know this, and yet we make it a lot. I mean, we sell it a lot as well. Like that is a heavy dish that we make often, but it comes from Africa, which I had no idea. And then I believe with food, similar to music, it's the one thing that, whether you're Black, white, Spanish, whatever your ethnicity is, as you take it to be your own, as we take it to infuse in what we believe will make it taste better, then that's just our way of taking something that someone else passed down to us. That's our way of saying, listen, I appreciate this so much that I like it, but my tongue is not feeling maybe the sauce we use. Like us Puerto Ricans make a Creole sauce that's not spicy, right? Then we make a garlic sauce and we add that on our mofongo. We add shrimp to it and it becomes something else. You add the Creole sauce, the vegetables, and it becomes something else. Same dish that came from the African slaves that were brought in Puerto Rico, but we just add our own little flair.
And that's
So,
appropriation.
yeah. There you go, boom.
Yeah, but so is there an instance in which someone not from Puerto Rico, say I, decided I was gonna cook Puerto Rican food, right? I'm in East Harlem, I decided to open up a restaurant around the way. Is that something that you would feel is inappropriate?
with her comment, if you are in the kitchen long enough and you learn the food, like you ate it every single day. I mean, we have Guatemalans that cook some of our dishes. You'll think it's a Puerto Rican in the kitchen, right? And I'm fine with it. They make it just as good as me, right? I mean, I don't cook. Jorge does more of the cooking, but I don't think I would have a problem if they truly pushed themselves into the culture and they really understood. If they did the history, if they stayed in Puerto Rico, whether it's a few months or a few years, they hung out in certain barrios where people would appreciate the food different. If that person opens up a restaurant, if I'm like, let's have some gandinga, and they can't eat it, then that would bother me because that's a part of the culture. If I say, let's have some morcilla, and they can't eat that with me, then yeah, in that case it would bother me. It's like, what kind of Puerto Rican restaurant is this if you yourself can't try all the food that we have? And gandinga, for some people, that's a cow heart and liver. It's usually frozen, chopped up into dices, sauteed with potatoes. My grandma used to make it, but that's something I would eat. And then the morcilla is blood sausage, right? It's like one of my favorite things in the world. But if I give it to another person, even some Puerto Ricans might give it to them. If they don't like it, I won't. But anyway.
I just want to say.
Yeah, please.
Well, I come from a very mixed background of cultures. On my grandfather's side is Sicilian and North Africans, and Italians, and Hungarians, and Arabic, and Jews. So I've been stopped. I was arrested in Italy for being Arab because my hair was crazy and my full hair was very dark. So I grew up in the Bronx in a diversified area, and for me, I thrive on diversity. I thrive on cuisine and flavors. I see the world as flavors, and I don't want to live in a world where, cultural appropriation means that I can't participate in your culture, no matter who you are. And I want to celebrate you, because all you are is a different expression of me. That's all the differences are. Genetically, there is no race. Biology says, if you look under a microscope, the mitochondria doesn't say you're black. It just says it's a mitochondria. And we're living in a very crazy time because disease doesn't recognize race or gender or sexual orientation or religion. It just knows it wants to host. So this is a unifying time. And cultural appropriation might just get thrown out the window based on that kind of logic. So I, as a chef or as a chef educator teaching in middle school for some years, I want people to come together. I don't want to resist what's the current administration. I want conductivity. I want people to realize that if I resist you, I'm just going to get sick. And to defeat what's the current administration is to have conductivity. That everyone in this room is different, no matter what shade you are. And food is one of those unifying things that bring people together. And yes, if I'm going to open up a Chinese restaurant, and I've studied food in China, for instance, then I'm not going to say I'm Chinese. It's not going to happen. But if I give credit and never use the word authentic, take that out. That's not good. And give praise and celebration to those who created this. In America, we're not having that conversation. The basis of the culture as an American, and I come from this diverse background, is to say, I recognize you for creating the culture out of the horror that was created.
But that doesn't happen. That's what we want to get to, right? But if we really look at the food world, and I'm classically trained. I went to Culinary Institute of America. I know you're gonna jump in here, but I never worked in a French kitchen. I worked in some really great kitchens in New York City. I've cooked around the world. But white people can go anywhere at any time and say, I'm gonna cook Puerto Rican food, and they will do it, and they will get the money, and they can do it. And nobody's ever gonna say to them, that's wrong. Right. Now, and if I go out and I'm gonna go cook Israeli food, somebody's gonna say, well, why are you doing that? You shouldn't be doing that, right? And regardless if I cooked in Israel, if I was in Jerusalem, if I prayed on the Western Wall, you know, it wouldn't matter what the story was because of the color of my skin, and that I'm not supposed to be doing that. But we'll use John George as an example. He cooks Vietnamese food in several of his restaurants. He says he's allowed to do that because his wife is from Southeast Asia. So he knows what Southeast Asian food's supposed to taste like because of his wife. But if I was to do that, I would get crucified in the culinary world, and people might not come to my restaurant because why dare you do that? It doesn't matter where I study. So as much as I agree with you on the points, I also disagree that really cultural appropriation is about white chefs, white male chefs in places around the world, and we can look at Portland that are cooking food that do not belong in the kitchen, cooking that food, and why are they cooking it? Because they know they can get away with it.
And so I want you to go, Mohammed, and then I want to piggyback off that, because I know you've been waiting, please.
You know, this shows how multi-layered, and given the complex history of the U.S., how difficult it is to talk about these things and answer them. So growing up in Guinea, in West Africa, I thought when I came here, the food I'd be eating would be burgers and hot dogs and pasta and stuff like that. So to my surprise, I spent the first 3.5 years of my life in Atlanta. And all of a sudden I was having soul food, and I'm like, holy, like this is so similar to our kisavali or our stews. And so I was just amazed as I learned more about history, how despite all that, the 400 years or so of slavery, the black culture managed to keep most of the culture in terms of the food, despite losing the language, despite losing all of the different things. So there was the main difference was using the ingredients they had available to them where they suddenly were versus what they had in West Africa.
Right.
And in the Caribbean, similarly, I see the same similarities in a way. And in terms of you asked earlier about the claim by other Africans, if one African does something great, how, Africa traditionally has been painted as this dark continent that's, filled with poverty and war and famine and all of these negative things. And it's always Africa. No one ever says this country or that country, it's always Africa.
That drives me insane.
And there's so much negativity towards it, which is another reason why we did what we did, because there's no easier way to get to the people than food. When people love your food, and people can be as racist as they want or not like Mexicans right now due to our current leader, but they'll go to a Mexican restaurant right after and have the best burrito and not even connect those two things.
Right.
But it's really complex. I think for us, African, the time that I've seen the most pushback in terms of, let's say, it's generally when there's a group of other ethnicities where you're owning the actual company, and then they put a front guy as if that's the person. So it's almost you're saying something is wrong by not owning up to it and saying, hey, I'm behind this, I'm responsible for this, I'm getting the help of this guy, and that tends to happen quite a bit, and that's when generally people feel a bit funny about it. But as you said, gentrification and some of these other things, it will happen, and unfortunately, and when they do happen, people in the community, the neighborhood, we see our beloved restaurants being shut down because the rent is too high. People that we used to connect with and love, all of a sudden no longer there. And so when a new restaurant opens up that does the exact same thing as the other person did, but they look different, it tends to create some tension.
So you're touching on a number of issues here that I love, and I love that you brought that up. I actually was going to specifically ask you about that because I was doing some research and preparing for this panel and seeing what the leading thought leaders or whatever in the industry thought. And there is a general tendency to ghettoize Chinese, Mexican, Indian, black chefs into cooking their own food, whereas white chefs sort of have the fluidity to cross borders into other cuisines, and they're seen as artistic. And I know for Kwame Unwachi, in his memoirs had said that a US producer had told him, I believe it was one of the reasons he didn't win Top Chef, was that America wasn't ready to see a black chef cooking fine cuisine. And so this is when I was gonna ask you, as a black man, as a chef, as a James Beard Award winner, what you thought about that. It's very clear that you think that that is wholly true.
Like if you go back 2013, 7 years, wow. So Parsons and Alexander create the CISO, right? Net Afro Asian American food. What is that, right? And I remember having a conversation with Alexander Smalls right before the doors opened. He goes, "Do you think people are gonna get this, JJ? Or do you think they're gonna call it soul food?" And for Alexander, that was a big pet peeve for him, that he in his life of 74 now, that every time he was cooking or he opened a restaurant, it was always soul food. It was never, you know, this guy that studied in Italy that makes the most amazing ham pasta, even though he was singing opera, that he could do that. It was something very soulish to it. And we were lucky in that time that we had two writers that took the time to define who the CISO was and really made us who we were. We won Esquire Best New Restaurant, we were in the New Yorker, Joshua David Stein, who wrote Kwame's book, Joshua Zersky, who passed away. They took the effort and the time, but at that time, in 2013, no white writers would even, and still to this day, they still don't come to Harlem, right? They still won't come to Harlem and write about the history of your restaurant that I'll hang out in when I was a kid living with my aunts in East Harlem. You know, nobody will ever go past 59th Street to write about the history and the culture here. So having, I think, Parsons with the backbone was able to push the envelope. But at that time in 2013 to 2016, 17, nobody was ready for the food of the African diaspora. Then kids, and I say kids of all diasporas started cooking the food of their diaspora, right? So the guys that own Attaboy, everybody should go eat their Korean food, super fine dining and low end. So Attaboy and Atamix. Nobody's ever seen Korean fine dining in New York City, ever, right? But if you talk to them, they'll say, well, JJ, you guys gave us heart, that we could really cook the food of who we were at the CISO, right? Kwame was cooking at a fine dining, he was cooking fine dining French food. The restaurant failed in 30 days. He came back and he went to cook the food of who he was, right? Or Eric, who was then on Top Chef after Kwame, made it to the finals and said the same thing. None of the judges on the show were understanding this food because they wanted them to cook fried chicken. They wanted them to make macaroni and cheese or some other pork chops. So I think the consumer, the guest is ready for food of black chefs to be at the helm, as we could count real black chefs at the helm across the nation cooking at the high level. But it's all in the way that we still have to describe our food. We have to say Caribbean, or we have to say West Indian, or we have to touch on these areas where people have traveled the world to go there. Because if we really go back in time, when Floyd Cardozo was cooking Indian food in New York City, he was cooking some of the best food, but nobody was eating at Tableau. People were going there, but not enough people, and he had to close Tableau. Now if we look at New York City 20 years later, we can go to Indian restaurants in our own neighborhood that are phenomenal, that we give a shot to, because a lot of us have traveled to India, or we have friends that have went there. So it's really based on that, and I think people are traveling to West Africa, and they're seeing the culture, they're finding themselves, especially young black Americans are going there, and then they're coming back and they want to see that food, and they're eating in those restaurants.
Yeah, to support your point, sorry, very quickly. 2015, we were at a BevNet conference, which is a beverage network. It's one of the top events you want to be at if you're starting a beverage company and such. And we had a Coke executive tell us that our brand looked too black. That's one of the reasons why we didn't win. You know, I don't mean, it just came, sat down next to me. He was one of the judges, and comes to me, I don't want to take this the wrong way, but I think, you know,
Feel free to name this executive. Feel free to name him.
I think you should tone down the Africa a little bit. I'm like, that is who I am. So to your point, they want you to be that person, but at the same time, it's a trap, because when you are that person, they say, I don't get it. I don't know if the person in Middle America will actually get this concept. And so whether it's investors, you get this all the time. So they want you to be who you are, and I'm embracing who I am happily. But at the same time, it's like, oh, we don't know if people will get this. 80% of our customers come through Whole Foods, and they're not Africans.
Yeah.
And the other thing was a journalist, Crane New York journalist. He asked us how our drink compared to other white drinks.
He used those.
Literally, he used those exact words. I told this to a British friend of mine. He says, like what, milk? So this is the type of stuff we sort of have to deal with sometimes.
I just like to say, as a black female chef in America, like what I often experience is what I like to call the Aunt Jemima complex. So it's like you see a black woman, like she's making you shrimp and grits or whatever. Like that's just the assumption. And like then you have to qualify yourself. Like, oh, like I don't qualify myself. Like I don't run my resume out to people because I don't care. I'm like, you can think what you want to think and just get shut down when you hit me up to make your shrimp and grits. And I'm like, sure, it's gonna be like $5,000 and like, you know, make it any type of way you want. But my point got away from me. Oh shoot. But yeah, I think that the original question was like, are we ready? I don't think that anybody is ready because again, even with that Aunt Jemima complex, like nobody is ready for the food that I'm ready to bring. Like I feel like I'm a student, I'm a chef, and I'm a student of the world. I travel all over the world, so I admire many, many cuisines that inspire me. I study them, I want to reproduce the food, and nobody's ready for that. I had an experience with a very, very popular television network for a TV show, and first they gave me the lay of the land, like, oh, what type of dish would you like to prepare? So I was like, oh, I'd like to do like alligator sauce pecan. That's like a Louisiana dish that's not very familiar to most people, but it's a very, very traditional dish. And I'm like, let me bring this dish to the world instead of just gumbo, red beans and rice, fried catfish. Like we also have this going on. Another dish I said, I was like, oh, I'd like to do a Szechuan style wonton soup. Really, really into Chinese food, Asian food, period. And the response I got from the producer at this very popular TV network was, he laughed and said, well, how would you look making Szechuan style dumpling soup? And I was like a chef, like, you know, like, what do you mean how would I look? You know, and I asked him, I was like, why? Because I'm black? And then that question stopped him in his tracks, and then he tried to backtrack, like, oh no, it's just because with your background, I'm like, what background? My background as a chef, my background traveling to Southeast Asia, northern parts of Asia, like what part of my background says, no, it would look crazy for me to prepare this dish? So I don't think anybody's ready, honestly. When it comes to food, it's a difficult time, especially as a person of color. It's like, on the one hand, you know, I want to cook the food from my culture, but I also just want to cook too. But I also just want to cook and be respectful to other cultures. Like when I'm asked to cook Caribbean food, I say no. Because I don't want anybody's Caribbean grandmother coming from the grave to crucify me because I didn't make the curry goat properly or whatever. But like, I just want to cook food that I love respectfully. That's it. And I just don't think that I don't think America is ready for that. Because when I travel to other countries, it's like here, I have to give my full resume and plus like give you my eggs for my unborn children. I go to another country, I say I'm a chef, full stop, full respect. It's like crazy, the difference is crazy.
Can I jump on that?
Please.
Because my business partner and I were talking about that this morning. So what's crazy is that we get more tourists that are willing to hang out in our neighborhood, right? In Spanish Harlem, like hang out, right? Come at 9 o'clock at night, 10 o'clock at night, hey, you guys are open? Than we would someone from what you were saying, Midtown or downtown, even 86th Street won't get anybody from, right? And so what's sad about it, and then I have a question for you, not to answer, not to Dave, JJ. Like at what point, how do we make sure that we bring those same people up here, right? Because you're 100% right. Anyone from around the world will come into this country and they'll go anywhere with no fear, When I lived in the South Bronx, I used to see tourists all the time, and I was like, what the fuck? Not even I was walking there. But the same thing, like, do they appreciate things a little more differently than we do? But at some point, I would love to pick your brain, because my vision is to start bringing people, the same people that will live in Harlem and then travel downtown to eat, to make sure they stay within the Harlem perimeter, right? And I feel that's something that we're truly missing from all the way from 103rd, whether you're on the east or the west side, all the way up to 125th, 145th Street.
Well, I think keeping money in the Black community is a great, maybe next panel talk. We could talk to Nicole for next Harlem Restaurant Week. That sounds like a great one. Because it's very important and something that the numbers are quite startling when you look at the Black community. Sorry,
going back to what you were saying, like sometimes you like, so where I'm open on 115, 116, some people think I'm the front of the business. Like, oh, it's owned by some white guy, right?
I've actually
Like,
heard that multiple times.
And like I'm arguing with people in the street.
Yeah.
Like, no, I own the business, you know, like, if it goes down, it's on me. If we run out of cash, they coming for me, you know, like, they're not coming for no white guy in the back, where like people think because it's nice and it's clean, it's like kryptonite, right? And it's like, well, nobody black right now in this era would put something nice, or Latino put something nice in our neighborhood. It's impossible. It's unheard of. And like, I'm talking to old people, and I'm talking to like young kids that have grown up in Harlem their whole lives, right? Or they want to eat there, but they don't want their friends to see them eat there. So like my aunts that live here their whole lives would be like, you know, the smoke guys on the corner, they love the black rice. I'm like, they eat it? It's like, yeah, but they'll send like their young girl to get the food and bring it to them, because they don't want the neighborhood to see that they're eating in your place, because the neighborhood thinks that it's owned by some white person.
Oh,
And so I would love to talk about that development issue that you were touching on.
So I would lean on Harlem Park to Park. I would lean on Curtis Archer, that they should probably reach out to the community, the people that actually live there, to say, hey, you need to go out and support these places. Robert Rodriguez, like all our council, like you need to go out and support these locally owned businesses that have been in the community for, we've been 25 years? 30 years, right? You need to go and make sure this place stays open. And I think a lot of people take it for granted.
And I would love for us to talk about, because I hate just griping about community and society without concrete steps forward in some way to solve the issues that we're bringing up. And so you both seem very passionate about it. I'm very passionate about it. I think that there's an ability between Uptown and Central, between all the organizations you're talking about, to definitely bring some political and community powers to bear on making sure that we preserve the cultural institutions that have, and new ones and old, that are making our community a idiosyncratic one for culinary experience. And so to that point, I want to talk a little bit about the concept of this gentrification. And there was just recently an article about West Harlem and how Columbia's development has drastically changed the culinary scene over there. And sort of twofold. One is the fact that, and it's something I talk about with commercial rent control and basically the pressures of a small business owner in a gentrifying area to serve the incoming clientele and the incoming demographic versus the historical demographic, because there's just more excess capital there, excess money to be going out and eating. And so you have an entire shift in the market away from, a lot of the times, the majority of the population to a minority of the population, because they have more money. So one, what can we really do about that? Two, one of the things, to bring it back to cultural appropriation a little bit, that you see, and especially when you think about soul food, is this sort of, you could say, artificial elevation of cuisine, right? So you can go to fried chicken spots, mac and cheese. I mean, I think lobster mac and cheese is like the perfect example, right? They used to serve lobsters to slaves because they thought they were like water bugs, right? And mac and cheese was supposed to be strictly for poor people, like strictly. And now you will go places and find a lobster mac and cheese for like $22 or something on a menu. Like, how did we get there? Like, is it wrong that we got there? Is this a natural progression that we don't really need to be so concerned about? Or are these both sort of
fundamentally tied in a way that we need to parse and sort of figure out.
So I'll jump. I'm a newer business owner. So I opened in Harlem because there's no fast casual restaurants that open in Harlem first. Everybody comes to our community third. So Shake Shack has what, 200 locations. They opened in Harlem. Everybody jumped up and down because they wanted Shake Shack, but that was like their 165th location, right? They didn't look at it. They opened in Harlem because they had to open in Harlem because they have all this money and they have to open somewhere. And where is there density that they can open, where they can get tax breaks, where they can look good to feed in their ethos, right? Chipotle didn't have to open in Harlem. That Chipotle is one of their most busiest Chipotles in the whole New York City. Because on 125th Street, where is there to eat? There's really nothing, right? When you go from east to west. I think, when I want to say this, I want everybody to take a step back is, gentrification only happens because we don't claim our neighborhood, right? So as a small business owner, some people might get upset with me, but as a small business owner, entrepreneur, we don't look to our neighborhood because we don't think we can do it in our own neighborhood. We will look outside our neighborhood. So like my friend just opened a floral shop in Murray Hill. She's from the Bronx. I said, why would you open up in Murray Hill? Why wouldn't you open up in Harlem or the Bronx? Nah, nobody in the Bronx or Harlem is gonna pay for flowers like this, right? But I'm like, for people work from Harlem and the Bronx and Murray Hill or around you that are gonna be going to your flower shop. But then she went a little bit deeper and said, landlords would take me to Murray Hill before they took me to Harlem. Brokers would take me to Murray Hill before they took me to Harlem. Brokers would take me to the broker's number that I would call that would be in the Bronx would then bring me to these neighborhoods, other neighborhoods beside my own neighborhood. And that is what is called gentrification, right? Because that landlord knows the rent is a quarter the price in Murray Hill. They want their homies to take that space so they'll last longer. They will get the tax breaks they will get the empowerment money, they will get all these things that exist that nobody in our neighborhood is offering us. And the reason why I say that is because, and I'll keep it very simple, very clear, Marcus opened up Red Rooster, he got empowerment money, right? Because there was nothing there. That empowerment money refreshed when I opened up Fieldtrip. When I went to go after the empowerment money, they said, no, we can't give you that much money now. We have to spread it around a little different. Did I get any of the empowerment money? No. Where it went, I'm not sure, right? And I go back and forth with Curtis and them all the time with where's the empowerment money, because I know it refreshed. It went to Shake Shack. It went to Chipotle. It went to those places because they're gonna bring 100 jobs to the neighborhood. They're not gonna go out of business, right? So when you talk about gentrification, we as the people that live here in Harlem, I'm gonna say, and I know the Bronx is doing it way better than we're doing it. The Black Americans and the Latinos have to claim our neighborhoods and really take our spaces and own the space. Because if not, somebody will come in, put up the same restaurant we would put up, and nobody would know if it was cooked by you or me or you. And I give you a lot of credit that you opened up on this corner on 125th, where there's in the Corn Exchange, where there's homeless in front of you when you open the door. There's methadone clinics on the corner, and when you go to the developers and you ask them to clean it up, they say, well, what do you want me to do? Talk to the city, right? So that's what we're against in these communities. When we talk about gentrification, and big brands can handle that, right? They can hire security. They're gonna get tax breaks from the state or from the city. They're not giving that time.
Yeah, people still walk by and say, you guys are crazy, and then they walk back out.
No, it's true. You hit on a really, for me, it's a sensitive topic because when I went into, so I was a silent partner first, right? And I was like, I funneled money into the business to keep it alive. And then I was like, all right, well, funnel's a bad word. I invested money. I mean, change that. And over time, I started realizing that, Jorge's been in the neighborhood forever, right? He built it from literally nothing, from Jordan Gina to where it was before he got burnt out. And then part of that burnt out was also because of the community. So the community would come in and they would want to keep eating the same food at the same price, not realizing the food cost goes up. And then I came in like, well, listen, man, like at some point you gotta make money. I get the concept of making sure the neighborhoods can still have what they have. The rent goes up, plantains go up. If it's a bad season, plantains go up. Avocados are hell expensive. So I was like, well, how can we do that, right? And I had to slowly increase the prices. And as I say, slowly increase it, and I mean, when I say increase, I'm talking $1 to $2, right? Not anything drastic. So from $1 to $2, I saw customers not come, leave, and leave, and leave. When I cut lunch special off, I was like, oh hell no, this is way too much. Like, it was just a horrible loss. I'm not even busy in lunch, right? I'll probably get a 1 o'clock lunch rush, 2 o'clock, but then again, that's usually from tourists, someone's on a birthday, or someone dies and the funeral knows us, so they send them to us. Like, it's crazy how it's changed. So, to your friend who opened up somewhere else, yeah, it is part of the broker that's showcasing the space as well. But then even our own people in the community will complain. When I had to focus on the bar for the first time, like, hey, I want to bring the first cocktail bar in Harlem. I want to make it, well, not the first in Spanish Harlem. I want to make it the best. I want the drinks to be insane. And I'm going to focus on that. Customers will come in, $11. I was like, yeah, 11. Oh my God, that's so much money. And I'm like, you buy a pack of cigarettes for like $15. I see you smoking in front of my restaurant. Like, what do you mean $11 is bad for an experience? When I went, I had to stop selling beers. I was selling beers at $3 in happy hour. I was like, oh, this is crazy. Crazy. And I saw the same customers in another restaurant spending $5. Like, no way. You know, so it's part of like, so I see what you're saying as well, but it also is how do we educate our customers to then say, hey, spend money here. You're going to spend it anyway, right? So why not just spend it here? What's $1 more? What's $2
But
more?
because you have Popeyes, you have Wendy's, you have all these other places. So like for me, I compete with red beans and red rice from Popeyes. That's $2.99, right? So it's good. I'm not gonna lie. But if you're gonna get a rice bowl and spend $9.99 on my chicken bowl, why wouldn't I go to Popeyes and get the red rice and $2.99 and the
But
chicken
to
wings?
piggyback off that, they're not going to spend $2.99. They're going to spend more because they're not just getting the beans.
No, I know, yeah.
That's the part that blows my mind.
But for them, Popeyes has built their trust, right? They have trust, and now they're there, and they have a value, and it's something that I'm competing with, right? Like I probably get one out of every 100 person that lived in that corridor for the last 30 years, and it's like, how can I do it every day? So you talk about, I want to bring back Kingdom in the summer in that corridor basketball tournament that's famous there, and be like, we call it Fieldtrip and team up with the city and activate that corridor, and like now people know who we are. So how can you do that? Can I fund it? Probably not. Can I get bigger brands to maybe fund it? Yeah, because who I am, but it's about like how can you perceive the trust and the value. For me, that's what I believe it is, and I see it every day. But if I was opening up Fieldtrip, when I had Fieldtrip at the US Open, people will pay $19, and I don't set the prices, they set the prices. But people pay $19 for our chicken bowl. They don't complain. Totally different customer, but they don't complain because they see value. You're at the US Open. Oh my God, that crispy chicken looks amazing. Oh, it's cultural. We never get that anywhere.
And I mean, I think that my restaurant's been there 25 years, and it's a very different situation, but I think it's more similar to yours. And it's very disconcerting a lot of time because it's the community members who give me the hardest hassle on the amount of food and the price. And it's like, I've been in there all the time. My mom's was in there all the time. It's like, if we had lots of money, we wouldn't be in the kitchen. Like, we're trying to keep prices down. And so then you layer on this property owner problem, right? And the lack of commercial rent control. Just to give you a little example about me, we've been there 25 years. I've been month to month for the last 4 years because I couldn't come to terms with my landlord. Because the lease that they wanted me to sign said that they had final approval on the sale of my business and 50% of the sale price.
What?
Wow.
That's what they wanted. And when I said no, they said, okay, the city says we don't have to move forward. And if you don't move forward, you continue month to month on the terms of your previous lease. Now, okay, now that's a pain. But on top of that, you have all the development coming in. You've got restaurants trying to copy exactly what I do all over the place. And there are locations where they have a lease and they can now go and get a beer and wine license. And they can cover most of their rent on their bar tab. but the city won't let me file for beer and wine because I'm month to month. So somehow I'm supposed to remain on the terms. I have to pay overages on tax numbers from the beginning of my last lease. So 15 years ago, pretty much, they're like, okay, you pay 30% above the tax rate from then. And even though the terms ended, I have to pay above on the tax rate back then when the neighborhood wasn't developed. So now the taxes are up here, and I'm paying as much of the taxes as pretty much the property owner. I'm taking a huge chunk of it. And so I'm sitting here and I'm like, well, I gotta raise my prices. What am I gonna do? And I gotta try and bring in different clientele, and I gotta try and market to different people and figure out a way to sort of serve my customers who allowed us to be here for a million years, but also pay my rent and pay my bills. And so my question is, you know, I don't like just griping about it, right? So what are we gonna do about this issue? Do you have thoughts?
My thoughts as far as solutions go, I consulted for a restaurant in my neighborhood, and the owner of the restaurant actually owns the building. So paying rent is not an issue for this owner. But the owner just, in her mind, was just like, I'm preparing to sell food to the new Bed-Stuy. I live in Brooklyn. And she completely just wiped out of her mind the residents that live in the neighborhood. And she won't accept that the people in the neighborhood will come to the restaurant. I used to be the chef at a very popular restaurant in Brooklyn called Peaches. This restaurant is not far from Peaches. Is successful because it's a good restaurant, but also because there's no competition. So I tried to explain to this owner that you're in a perfect position business-wise, but you need to listen to me. You need to value the people in the neighborhood. Like these white people you see, they're in Airbnbs in the neighborhood because it's cheap. They don't live here. So they're gonna come to your restaurant on the weekend for brunch or during the week for dinner, of course, and then you're never gonna see them again. But my guys at the barbershop right next door, they're here every day, and they refuse to eat your food because you don't make them feel welcome. So I understand the business side of things, that everybody has to pay rent, bills, but I also understand that customers don't give a fuck. Pardon my language, that's not their problem. You know, so it has to be a balance between making the people in your community feel welcome in your spaces, and it might take some, I don't think it'll take anything too much extra than just be friendly with people. Like, I'm sure you're a very friendly chef with the people in your neighborhood, and you see them, you're like, hey, what's up? Like, I really think it takes that. So it's not just like, okay, now my cocktails, I have a new cocktail menu, they're $11, $13, $15, and nobody wants to pay, but people will pay. If you're their homeboy, oh, this is my boy, like such and such, they'll pay, and they'll bring their friends if they feel comfortable. This particular restaurant I'm speaking of, it looks really nice inside, and nothing or no one inside it looks like, hey, come into my restaurant, you live in a neighborhood, I want you here. So I think it's a little bit of a give and take on that end, and then when you get the people who are coming from outside the neighborhood, from a business perspective, but you cash in on that, you cash in. So on the weekends, when you know people are coming into the city and they wanna go and visit your restaurant, that's when you do your whatever, $39, your $90 tasting menus, because you know you're gonna cash out, or brunch, you're gonna cash out. But like what sustains businesses, especially restaurants, are the people who eat there every day, or every other day, or 2 or 3 nights a week, or something like that. So it's a push and pull. It's like show the community love, and unfortunately for visitors, take their money, you know?
Yeah, I mean, the 80-20 rule applies. 80% of business always comes from 20% of your customers. The first thing we tried to do was think, okay, this is a very shady area. How do we change people's perception? Because when people go downtown, they're okay paying that $20. It's downtown, it's the city. So how do we change that shift? How do we create that shift while they're in Harlem here? customer service is the number one thing for us. We don't care who you are when you walk in. We're treating you like a king or a queen. If you say this is too expensive, this is not good, to us, it's just a lack of understanding. We make sure we talk to you calmly, we explain things to you, we give you tastings, so you know the quality of what you're trying or what you're getting. And we've gotten a lot of customers that way, and now they cannot go anywhere else. But it is a challenging situation because a lot of changes are happening. Rent is ridiculous. I mean, the city has to, at some point, there are so many empty commercial spaces right now all throughout the city. There's only so many cups of coffee you can sell in a day. So at some point, the city's gonna have to step in to help businesses out. Yeah, I mean, there's that side of it. And gentrification is really, really difficult because it's a couple of things. It's also economics. It's those who maybe have a little bit more than those who live in the neighborhood currently, but not as much as the ones in Midtown, maybe trying to come up here now because it's a little bit cheaper, or it's a cool area now, so everyone does come. But that's gonna happen no matter what. So all we can do is try to make sure that we keep the local customers that are there, and we also welcome the newcomers as far as business goes. That's the only way we can survive.
And I'll throw something out there, like everybody knows the new hotel is coming up right next to the Apollo, right? And they're gonna have a rooftop, they're gonna have a ballroom, they're gonna have a restaurant, they're gonna have a cafe. Have they come to anybody in the neighborhood to ask them to operate that?
They did.
Who?
One person.
Yeah, that I know.
They probably came to Marcus, right? But Marcus wouldn't open a restaurant there. But have they come to anybody in the neighborhood?
Adrian doesn't seem like she wants to come with us.
And the only reason why
She's chiming up if you're not ready to come with it.
only reason why I brought it up.
I want to be respectful.
Only reason why I brought it up is because 3 major restaurant operators from downtown got asked to take over the space. And they then emailed me and said, hey JJ, I think you should do this. And emailed the people back. 3 different people. They never responded on the email to me. Right? They never said, hey JJ, let's sit down and talk. But 3 major restaurant operators, Andrew Carmelini, a big David Burke's group, like big restaurant operators were asked to operate the space, and they said, hey, I don't think this is just not for us unless we're going to partner with somebody in the neighborhood, right? And there's so many people that own multiple restaurants in Harlem that we don't know that own multiple restaurants in Harlem. You as one, right? Or it could be a tag team effort. There's 5 people on this panel that could have 5 different outlets in a hotel that could potentially change our status of who we are as business owners. So going back to that question about gentrification, like that's a point of gentrification right there, right? The biggest hotel above Uptown is gonna open up. It's gonna be packed. They're gonna have a rooftop. They're gonna print money. But the people that are gonna be operating their hotel will not look like, operating their food and beverage will not even look like Harlem at this moment, unless that changes.
And I'm glad you brought that to my attention, because one of the things I was gonna say is the only thing that can push back against this is organization. Organization of us, of the organizations in this community, like Park to Park, like Uptown Grand Central, like the Caribbean Cultural Center, to bring pressure on electeds and to bring pressure on the public to make their voices heard, that this is an unacceptable way to move forward. And that's one of the things that Uptown Grand Central focuses on, as I mentioned before, is a culturally responsive and responsible development, right? So it's not just putting up a new building, but it's figuring out how you put up that new building and pay homage to the community and the cultural institutions that you may be displacing or you may be joining in the community. And so I know that we've talked about development projects and things like that, but to me, that's completely unacceptable. And I think that most people from Harlem would feel that way. I just don't think that most of us, it's brought to our attention, and we don't know what type of actions can be taken to rectify.
And listen, I love a lot of the elected officials at the top. I do a lot of work with them, but they're in control of that.
Let me be clear, I do not love a lot of the elected officials. Right? I'm saying we gotta go and wring their arm, which is what I often do. It's like you gotta beat their door down and make it clear that there will be a cost. It's like, you're right, we may not get this development because I'm sure it's very far down the road, but we need to make sure that there's a cost to the elected officials who signed off on that paper, and when that thing opens or whatever it is, that there are people being like, this is some BS. And without that, the next time the developer comes, they're gonna be like, the last guy called Carlisle, they were able to put it up, and they're never coming to the site. So as long as they know that the checks are clearing, they don't care one way or the other. But if the elected officials, and I'm not gonna call out any names because we may want them to be on our side, but if we go to them and they're getting beat over the head, like, how did you let this happen? Again, the next time a developer calls, they're gonna be like, let me find one of these chefs to be at least part of this conversation so that I do not get the same thing happen to me again and again and again. And that is the only way. And again, that may not even work because there's so much nonsense that goes on between education in this community, between the treatment centers right out here on this M25 bus that literally buses deleterious elements into our community every single day to drop them, to mess up, to make it impossible to run a business over here. And you said there's no restaurants on 125th. Excuse me, I'm right here on 125th.
I know.
Okay, I'm right here. He's right there too. Okay, so there are some, but it's not that we without us bringing our voices and at times our money to bear on the issue. Yeah, it's like we need to be boycotting. Like people need to not be spending their dollars there. Because as long as they spend their dollars there, the developer's going to keep going because they don't care.
But I have a feeling they're not necessarily building it for the people in the neighborhood. The hotel will likely be.
Of course, it's not for the people.
And
the
the newer residents.
But ironically, you have people that, ironically, not to interrupt, but it'll be the same people that would give us a hard time spending money in our local restaurant, that would go to the hotel, to go to the rooftop to say, you know what, I got the view, I paid the $20 on the drink, but I didn't spend the $12 or $10 somewhere else. So it'd be, that's like the double-edged sword sometimes, right? With your thing with your customers, your local people. And then to talk about boycotting, I mean, I believe it's something that we should do. I boycott Bacardi, all of Bacardi brands. I'll never sell in my restaurant. I go to restaurants, I see it up there, I give them shit for it, especially if they're a Latin restaurant. I'm like, oh, you shouldn't sell that, it's horrible, whatever. That's another, I'll tell you guys that on a side note. But I do that, and when customers come in and, let me get Bacardi. Nope, we don't sell that here, and I educate them. Let me get Grey Goose. Bacardi owns them, we don't support Bacardi. Oh, let me get Bombay. Ooh, we got this amazing gin here. Let me show you what we have. It's all by, like, and I keep pushing it. And then I had to educate my mixologist on it, I've had to educate the rest of my staff on it. My business partner does a lot of what I say, which is fortunately good sometimes. But I agree with you. Like at some point we should find a way to say, no, we don't want this. Like we are the voice in the neighborhood, right? Like we are the ones that should be like, no, this is not gonna happen, and we're not gonna stand for it. The fact that you're going through what you're going through, hell, I'll reach out to a few friends that I have that are lawyers and be like, listen, you gotta help him because he's going through some tough shit right
now. There's nothing you can do. I have great lawyers, and the fact of the matter is, the rules are the rules. And the rules of New York City say, if you cannot come to terms with your landlord, you continue on the lease that you previously had, from month to month until you can come to terms, or forever, in whatever that word is, perpetuity. Or, yeah, and any time they can cancel in 30 days. So imagine the precarity of that. I can't develop my space because in 30 days they could ask me to leave. And then on top of that, the liquor license authority is like, without a 12-year lease, I don't care what you guys say. So any lawyer's just like, well, you got to bring them to the table. And they're like, okay, I want final approval, and then I want 50% of the sale price, which is an absurd thing to ask for. Which, again, they would never ask for in any other neighborhood other than ours, because to go back to the vacancy, we have over 50% vacancy in this community. And they know that there is no other developed kitchen I can up and move to. Downtown, if someone was to say that to you, you would find a developer across the street and be like, they're trying to screw me on the terms. I've had a good restaurant for 20 years. Let me move to your space under similar terms, or you can raise me a little bit, but he's trying to break my back. And you'd be able to do that. You can't do that here. So it's not a balanced negotiation. It's a monopoly dealing with a little mom and pop, and they're gonna dictate the terms. But so again, I've been dealing with this for years, and I could talk about it all day. But one of the small wins that, and I love the way that you talked about the development and using it to our advantage, how we can, because it is a beast. The RanDe is the biggest lobbyist organization in the country, the Real Estate Board of New York. But you can get small wins. For example, all of the murals that you guys might have walked by around on Park Avenue, I'm sure Ginjan sort of appreciates the slight beautification across the street from their business. That was all, those are both Durst development buildings. And just through Uptown Grand Central beating their head and being like, yo, please do something for us, do something else. They're like, we'll pay the fines for you guys to put up all these murals. So they're paying fines for us to have those murals on their development. Now that is a very small win, right? But it shows that you can get something. And we may as well ask instead of just wringing our hands and being like, well, they just really suck. And then they're gonna come and develop anyway. So we may as well figure out how we can get what we can get, and just sort of capitalize on that.
I think another solution too is like the opposite of that. The opposite of thinking about small wins, think about big wins. Like I think one thing that we don't do as people of color is we don't think about money and wealth in the same way. And I think a solution is we need to diversify our portfolio. Like look at Danny Meyer. I worked at the very first Shake Shack, flipping burgers in Madison Square Park, when it was only one. Danny Meyer is a restaurateur. He has restaurants all over New York, popular restaurants. One idea would be like, oh, let's like push the envelope. We want more like Gramercy Tavern style restaurants or whatever other fine dining restaurants he has. But he's just like, no, I'm gonna sell hamburgers. I think sometimes as chefs, we let the artistry get in the way of the business. So I always said, sure, it's all this food I love to make, but my concept for the first restaurant I owned is something very small, like window service, standing room only, one type of beer on tap, grab and go and get out of there. So I could turn over, and eventually franchise it. So I'm thinking business-wise. Once I franchise it, I could go and open Airis's gourmet, fine dining, Michelin starred, fufu shishi, whatever. Because I'm bankrolling from this small concept that I franchised all over. So again, going back to what I said, initially, that a solution would be to diversify our portfolios. And sometimes money is an issue, but money is not an issue when we come together. As people of color, that's a struggle because a lot of times we feel like we're competing against each other. So it's like, oh, if you're Chef JJ and I'm Chef Airis, we can't possibly work together and put together a concept together because, well, I'm Chef JJ and I'm Chef Airis, you know? And that is detrimental. Like even with the situation with the hotel, like nobody came to a Harlem restaurateur, a restaurateur of color, but if Harlem restaurateurs and restaurateurs of color here had the level of money they were looking for, they went to David Burke, not because he's the best chef in the world, he's a noted chef, but he's got paper, you know, and he could, it's white man's world, but green is the universal color, you know, so I think we need to start thinking more, we need to have a wealth-based mind. Like I'm all for a good, we shall overcome, but I'm also for a good, like, let's get this money and like, let's do business, you know?
Yeah, I mean, I agree 100%. It actually reminds me of a story that my father once told me. He does business consulting, and sometimes for a lot of pastors down south. He's at this big conference, and he asked them all, if I give you $1 million, what would you guys all do in your communities? And they all talk about these fellowship programs, and this books, and backpacks for kids, and all this. And my dad said, you know what I would do? I would open 5 McDonald's. And with the profits, I would do all the things that you're saying. But that McDonald's is gonna keep bringing in revenue. I don't need to come back and ask for $1 million next year.
Right.
That is gonna be the source of funds for any of those community projects that you were talking about. But I don't have to come back and ask you for more money next time. So that's the type of investment that you're talking about. That's the type of mentality that we need to have. And I agree wholeheartedly. And I think that obviously the biggest part is bringing enough capital to the table. But I think that, you know, if we bring enough people to bear on the issue, we can make that happen. And I would love for us to commit to some type of conversation in the next 2 months or so. I know everybody's busy, but there certainly are opportunities, and we certainly want to make some people pay if they don't listen to us in some form or fashion, right?
East Harlem style.
Yeah.
So everybody, there's a ton of food from all the different businesses. I think most of it.
Can people introduce their food? If
Oh,
people like
okay,
know
yeah.
what it is?
So anyone who did bring food, please give us a little introduction of the dish.
Cool. Just because we went this way, no? I did piononos. So piononos, it's origin Spain with our twist on it. It's a sweet plantain. We use like those little muffin pans, wrap it up. There's ground beef in the middle, cheese on top with bell peppers, and it's like shredded cheese. And then I don't know how many vegans are in here, but I did a bean empanada with vegan cheese, so a mix of cashew and almond cheese. But I didn't bring many of those because I didn't know how many vegans were here. I pulled one pionono one, but that's pretty much what we have.
I brought food from Red Rooster from Chef Edward Brumfield. He made some wings, but he didn't, so I cooked it for speaking on his behalf.
I brought some coconut rice and peas, some kalaloo, which is okra, spinach, coconut cream, some spices, and some codfish fritters.
I brought some ginjan. It's a traditional West African ginger drink. It's fresh ginger as the main ingredient with pineapple, lemon, vanilla, and anise, and it's all organic.
Yeah, I want to give Chef one chance if you want to have any thoughts to add to the conversation.
Yeah, so my background is totally different from yours guys, and I'm quite new here in New York.
What's your name?
Mike, I'm Chef Mike. I come from France. I was born in France, and I moved to Martinique, so I'm half French, I'm half from Martinique, so Caribbean. And I work here. We opened 2 weeks ago, a restaurant in the West Village. So, and all the speech and all the things that you are saying is very interesting because in France, we are like 100 years later than this process between the different races and all the story about. And it's interesting to see how being all together and continuing as a chef to represent our food, our culture. For example, I make fusion because it's my identity. I'm half French, half Caribbean. I grew up in both places, and it's very interesting because culture is alive and represents you, and it's evolving and rising every day, and we bring this culture to people. So I will have more things to say next time.
What's the name of your restaurant?
Sorry?
Tell us the name of your restaurant.
It's Mad Morton. Mad Morton, like Morton Street, M-O-R-T-O-N.
Okay.
It's on 7th Avenue South. And so it's brand new, so you can
Right across
guess.
from the Five Guys?
Fonda?
You said 7th Avenue South?
Yeah,
Like right across from Five Guys and Burger Spot?
probably. So I know it's between Christopher Street and Houston Street, the stop. And you guys can come to support. We open from Wednesday to Sunday. We make the brunch and everything. And so my menu is quite unique about French and Caribbean.
Cool. Definitely gonna come check it out. Thank you everybody for coming out. Come try the food. Don't forget to check out the census booth, right? The census is very important. Please check out the census booth as well. Thank you.